This is 107.3 FM, Outbreak FM. My name is David Morgan, and it's currently 11:23 a.m. on what started as an absolutely ordinary Friday morning here at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York. If you're just tuning in, whether you're in one of the terminals, sitting in your car in long-term parking, or listening from somewhere in the surrounding communities, I need you to pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you, because the situation developing here is unlike anything any of us have ever experienced before. Sarah Chen and I have been broadcasting from our temporary studio setup in Terminal 4 for the past 6 hours, covering what we thought was going to be a routine travel day feature about international connections and holiday traffic patterns. We had interviews scheduled with airport staff. We were planning to talk to travelers about their destinations, and we were expecting this to be pleasant background content for people heading into the weekend. Instead, approximately 18 minutes ago at 11:05 a.m., everything changed in a way that I'm still struggling to process, even as I'm describing it to you. At 11:05 a.m., airport security was called to Gate 47 in Terminal 1 for what was initially reported as a medical emergency involving a passenger who had just arrived on Flight 237 from Frankfurt, Germany. The passenger, an adult male whose identity hasn't been released, collapsed in the gate area immediately after deplaning and was unresponsive when Port Authority police and airport medical staff arrived on scene. According to the emergency medical technician who treated him, the passenger had no pulse, no respiration, and showed no signs of life whatsoever. He was officially pronounced deceased at 11:08 a.m., just 3 minutes after the initial call, and his body was covered with a sheet while they waited for the medical examiner's transport team to arrive. What happened next is where the situation becomes something I never thought I would be reporting as fact rather than fiction. At 11:14 a.m., 6 minutes after being pronounced dead, that passenger sat up, not groggily, not slowly regaining consciousness like someone waking from unconsciousness, but sitting straight up with what witnesses are describing as violent, sudden movement. Before anyone could react or understand what they were seeing, he attacked the EMT who had pronounced him dead, biting the man's arm with enough force to tear through the uniform sleeve and into the flesh beneath. When other responders tried to pull him off, he attacked them as well, showing what multiple witnesses describe as superhuman strength and complete absence of any pain response when struck with batons. Sarah is monitoring Port Authority police communications right now, and she's hearing reports of similar incidents at gates across multiple terminals. Terminal 1 has 3 separate medical emergencies that match this exact pattern. Terminal 4, where we're currently located, has 2. Terminal 5 has 4. Terminal 7 has 1. We're talking about at least 10 individuals across JFK who were declared deceased from various medical emergencies, who then reanimated and attacked airport staff and other passengers in the immediate vicinity. The people who were attacked are now showing symptoms including extremely high fever, violent behavioral changes, loss of verbal communication, and aggressive attacks on anyone near them. I know how this sounds, and believe me, if I weren't watching this unfold in real time through our studio window right now, if Sarah weren't monitoring multiple emergency frequencies, confirming the same pattern, if we weren't seeing the video footage being uploaded to social media by travelers trapped in gate areas, I would assume this was some kind of elaborate hoax or mass panic event, but this is real. This is happening right now at one of the busiest airports in the world, a facility that serves 62 million passengers annually, that has 6 terminals covering nearly 5,000 acres, that employs over 40,000 people, and has another 300,000 people moving through it on any given day. At 11:29 a.m., the Port Authority Police Department made the decision to initiate a complete ground stop for all aircraft. No planes are taking off from JFK as of 6 minutes ago. All inbound flights that haven't already begun their final approach are being diverted to other airports in the region. The aircraft that are currently on the taxiways or at gates are being held in position. Pending further assessment, we're looking at roughly 200 aircraft on the ground, right now carrying approximately 40,000 passengers who are either still on planes or have deplaned into terminals where these incidents are occurring. The challenge we're facing, and I need everyone to understand this clearly, is that an airport is essentially the worst possible environment for containing any kind of infectious outbreak. We have people from every country in the world moving through shared spaces. We have multiple terminals connected by air train shuttles, and buses that cycle passengers continuously. We have security checkpoints where thousands of people queue in close proximity. We have gate areas where hundreds of passengers sit within feet of each other waiting for flights. We have baggage claim areas where people from multiple international flights converge. And we have approximately 75,000 people on airport property right now, which includes passengers, airport employees, airline staff, retail workers, ground crew, security personnel, and everyone else who makes this facility function. Sarah just handed me an update from the Centers for Disease Control. They're dispatching a rapid response team, but they're coming from Atlanta and won't arrive for at least 4 hours even with priority air transport. The New York City Department of Health is sending personnel, but they're coming from Manhattan and dealing with typical Friday traffic, which means probably 90 minutes minimum. Port Authority has activated their Emergency Operations Center, and they're coordinating with NYPD, FDNY, and federal agencies. But coordinating and responding are two different things, and right now we need response faster than coordination can provide it. At 11:37 a.m., we received our first eyewitness call from someone actually inside one of the affected gate areas. Her name is Jennifer, and she's at Gate 32 in Terminal 1, with approximately 200 other passengers who were waiting for a flight to Los Angeles. That is now indefinitely delayed. Sarah is putting her through now. Jennifer, you live on Outbreak FM. Can you describe what you're seeing? Jennifer told us there are at least 5 individuals in her gate area who are attacking other passengers. She described them as moving erratically, making guttural sounds instead of speaking, showing no recognition of people they were traveling with just minutes before, and biting anyone they can reach. Gate agents initially tried to restore order using standard crowd control procedures, but when these individuals didn't respond to verbal commands or even physical barriers, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Jennifer and about 30 other passengers have barricaded themselves inside a family restroom near the gate, and she can hear screaming and what sounds like fighting continuing outside in the main gate area. We advised her to stay exactly where she is, keep the door locked and barricaded, stay as quiet as possible, and wait for security forces to secure the area, though honestly we have no idea how long that's going to take. Dr. Michael Reynolds from the Airport Medical Center called in at 11:42 a.m., and what he told us fundamentally changed how Sarah and I are understanding this situation. Dr. Reynolds has been practicing emergency medicine for 23 years. He's treated everything from heart attacks to traumatic injuries, and he told us with absolute certainty that what he's observing does not match any known medical condition in his experience. He's examined individuals who were attacked in separate incidents, and both showed the same rapid progression, symptoms appearing within 5 to 8 minutes of being bitten, including fever spiking above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, complete loss of higher cognitive function, inability to speak or respond to verbal commands, and violent aggression directed at any uninfected person nearby. The critical piece of information Dr. Reynolds provided is the timeline. Based on his direct observation, people who are bitten show symptoms in 5 to 8 minutes. They progress to what appears to be clinical death within 30 to 50 minutes, and then they reanimate approximately 2 to 4 minutes after their heart stops beating. Once reanimated, they attack others, spreading the infection through bites, and the cycle continues with each victim becoming a new vector within roughly 40 to 60 minutes total. He emphasized multiple times that he has no explanation for how this is medically possible, that reanimation after death violates everything he understands about human physiology, but that he's watched it happen twice now with his own eyes, and he needs everyone to understand that there is no treatment currently available for people who have been bitten. Let me repeat that because it's critically important for your survival. If you're anywhere near JFK right now, there is no treatment for people who have been bitten. Dr. Reynolds has access to a fully equipped medical facility. He has decades of emergency medicine experience, and he is telling us that once someone is bitten by an infected individual, that person will die within an hour and will reanimate as another infected individual who attacks others. The only survival strategy is complete avoidance of exposure to anyone showing symptoms of infection. At 11:49 a.m., Port Authority police upgraded their response from medical emergency to active threat scenario. All PAPD officers on airport property are being directed to gate areas where incidents are occurring, and they're being authorized to use whatever force is necessary to stop infected individuals from attacking others. What that means in practical terms is that officers are being told they may need to use lethal force against people who appear to be attacking others, even though this goes against every standard protocol for dealing with medical emergencies or even violent individuals. Sarah is monitoring radio traffic, and she's hearing reports that standard restraint techniques are completely ineffective. Officers are reporting that infected individuals don't respond to pain compliance. They don't stop when hit with batons. They don't react to pepper spray or tasers. And they continue attacking even after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate a normal person. The guidance being given to officers now is to aim for headshots if firearms are necessary, because that's the only method that appears to reliably stop an infected individual from continuing to attack others. The situation is spreading beyond the gate areas now. At 12:04 p.m., we received reports of infected individuals in terminal for baggage claim, which is where international passengers collect their luggage after clearing customs. This is particularly concerning because baggage claim is an enclosed space with limited exits where hundreds of people from multiple flights congregate in close proximity while waiting for their luggage to appear on the carousels. If infection is spreading in that environment, we're looking at dozens or potentially hundreds of new exposures happening faster than security can respond. Ground transportation areas are also being affected as of 12:11 p.m. Taxi queues, ride-share pickup zones, and shuttle bus stops are all locations where infected individuals are making contact with people who have no idea what's happening inside the terminals. Some of these people are getting into vehicles and leaving the airport property before showing symptoms, which means infection could be spreading into surrounding communities right now while we're still trying to understand and contain what's happening at the airport itself. The airtrain system shut down at 12:15 p.m. after an infected passenger attacked the operator of one of the trains running between terminals. The airtrain normally moves about 20,000 people per hour between terminals and to the parking lots and Jamaica Station connection. And now it's completely offline, with several trains stopped on the tracks, with passengers still aboard. Those passengers are trapped in enclosed train cars with no information about what's happening, no ability to evacuate safely, and in some cases with infected individuals who were on the train when it stopped at 12:23 a.m. And I want everyone listening to understand this is absolutely real and not speculation. Terminal 1 has been completely overrun. Port Authority police are reporting they can no longer maintain security at that terminal, and they're evacuating all remaining personnel to defensive positions in other terminals. They estimate there are at least 200 infected individuals in Terminal 1 now, with hundreds more uninfected people trapped in various locations throughout the terminal, including gate areas, restrooms, shops, and restaurants. Officers who evacuated from Terminal 1 are describing it as complete chaos, with infected individuals moving through all areas of the terminal and attacking anyone they encounter. This raises a horrifying question that Sarah and I are trying to process, even as we continue broadcasting. If Terminal 1, with roughly 12,000 people inside at peak capacity, has fallen to infected in just over an hour, and if the infection spreads from each victim to multiple new victims within an hour, what does that mean for the other 5 terminals? What does that mean for the 75,000 people currently on airport property? The mathematics of exponential spread suggest that without immediate and effective intervention, we could be looking at the entire airport complex becoming compromised within hours. The FAA issued a ground stop for all New York area airports at 12:27 p.m. JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark are all closed to arriving traffic, which means dozens of aircraft that were en route to New York are being diverted to airports as far away as Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. The airspace over JFK is being cleared, and a 5-mile restricted zone is being established around the airport perimeter. Military aircraft may be tasked with enforcing that airspace restriction, which tells you something about how seriously federal authorities are taking this situation, even if they haven't publicly characterized it as anything beyond a medical emergency. We're receiving reports at 12:34 p.m. that some passengers and airport employees are attempting to evacuate on foot by walking along the access roads and taxiways. This is extremely dangerous for multiple reasons, including active aircraft operations, vehicle traffic, and the fact that walking away from terminals puts you in open areas with no shelter and no security support if you encounter infected individuals. Port Authority is broadcasting warnings telling people to shelter in place rather than attempt evacuation. But people are panicking and making their own decisions about what feels safest. The long-term parking lots are experiencing total gridlock as of 12:39 p.m. Thousands of people who parked their cars and went into the terminals hours or days ago are now trying to retrieve their vehicles and evacuate. But the exit toll plazas can't process that volume of traffic, and the access roads are backing up. Cars are being abandoned in parking spaces. People are offering money to strangers for rides, and there are reports of altercations breaking out as fear and desperation escalate. Some people are driving the wrong way on one-way roads trying to find alternate exit routes, creating additional chaos and blocking emergency vehicles trying to reach the terminals. At 12:47 p.m., Dr. Reynolds called in again with updated information that makes the situation even more dire than we thought. He's now observed infection progression in 5 separate individuals, and he's refined his understanding of the timeline. Initial symptom onset occurs for just 7 minutes after bite exposure. Full cognitive collapse happens at the 15-minute mark. Clinical death occurs between 25 and 45 minutes post-exposure, depending on severity of the bite and overall health of the victim. Reanimation happens 2 to 3 minutes after clinical death. What this means is that from the moment someone is bitten, you have a maximum window of about 50 minutes before that person is up and attacking others, and the average is closer to 35 minutes, which is faster than his initial estimates. He's also observed something extremely disturbing about the behavior of infected individuals. They're not randomly wandering or attacking the nearest person. They appear to be moving toward concentrations of people, toward areas with noise and activity, toward anywhere that uninfected humans are gathered. Gate areas full of waiting passengers, food courts with customers eating, security checkpoints with lines of travelers. It's almost like they're hunting in the most efficient way possible, going where the prey is densest, even though they show no signs of intelligence or planning in any other aspect of their behavior. Sarah just received word that her brother works in retail at Terminal 5, and she's been trying to reach him for the past 20 minutes without success. All cellular networks are overloaded right now, with everyone trying to call loved ones simultaneously, so she can't get through. She's staying professional and continuing to monitor communications, but I can see the fear in her eyes, and I know she's terrified that her brother might be caught in whatever is happening in that terminal. If you're listening and you work at JFK, if you have family or friends who work here, please understand that communication is extremely difficult right now, and lack of contact doesn't necessarily mean the worst has happened. At 1:03 p.m. we got confirmation that military assets are being deployed. The New York National Guard is activating units and preparing for possible deployment to JFK, though the timeline for actual boots on the ground is still several hours away at minimum. They need to recall personnel, brief them on an unprecedented situation, equip them appropriately, and transport them through traffic to get here. Federal authorities are also discussing whether the situation warrants activation of military resources beyond National Guard, which would involve active duty forces and potentially heavy equipment. The question everyone is asking, both in official channels and among the public, is whether this is a localized incident contained to JFK, or whether similar events are happening elsewhere. So far we have no confirmed reports of identical incidents at other airports, but we also know that the initial incident here occurred less than 2 hours ago, and it took us 45 minutes to understand that this was something beyond a standard medical emergency. If this started at other airports around the same time, they might still be in the early stages before the exponential growth becomes obvious. At 1:11 p.m., Port Authority made the decision to lock down Terminals 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7. All entry and exit points are being secured. No one is being allowed to enter from outside, and no one is being allowed to leave until the situation is assessed and controlled. This means approximately 50,000 people are now locked inside 5 terminals, with infected individuals moving through those same spaces. The rationale is that preventing people from leaving stops infected individuals from spreading into surrounding communities. But the immediate cost is trapping tens of thousands of uninfected people in an active outbreak zone. Sarah is getting calls from people inside the terminals who are terrified by the lockdown. They understand the public health logic, but they're watching infected individuals attack people in gate areas and concourses, and they desperately want to get out. One caller described seeing a gate agent being attacked by 3 infected passengers, with other agents trying to help but being attacked themselves, and security being unable to reach them through crowds of panicking travelers. He asked us what he should do, and honestly we didn't have a good answer. Stay where you are. Try to find a secure room. Avoid infected individuals. Wait for help. Those are the only options when you're trapped inside. The first confirmed police fatality occurred at 1:19 p.m. when an officer responding to an incident in Terminal 4 was bitten by an infected individual. He was trying to restrain. Other officers pulled the infected person off and secured the immediate area. But the bitten officer is now showing symptoms and is being held in medical isolation. His partner, who has known him for 8 years, had to be physically removed from the medical area when he tried to stay with his infected friend. This is the human cost of this crisis. People watching their colleagues, their friends, their family members transform into something they don't recognize, and knowing there's absolutely nothing they can do to save them. At 1:27 p.m., we received our first report of infected individuals being shot and killed by police. 3 infected were attacking a family in Terminal 5. Officers responded and gave verbal commands that were ignored. And when the infected continued their attack, the officers fired multiple shots. According to the incident report, all 3 infected were hit center mass multiple times, but continued moving until officers delivered headshots that finally stopped them. This confirms what we've been hearing about infected individuals not responding to pain and continuing to function despite normally fatal injuries. It also confirms that the only reliable method to stop an infected individual is destruction of the brain. The implications of this are staggering. Standard law enforcement training emphasizes center mass shooting because it's the largest target and most likely to stop a threat. But if center mass shots don't stop infected individuals, then every police officer is going to have to retrain their instincts in the middle of a crisis situation and start aiming for much smaller, harder to hit targets. The failure rate is going to be high, ammunition is going to be consumed at much higher rates than normal, and officers are going to be in danger for longer periods while attempting to neutralize threats. And if this is what police with training are facing, imagine what happens when civilians try to defend themselves. At 1:34 p.m., Sarah's monitoring reports that Terminal 1 is on fire. The source of the fire is unclear. Could be electrical damage from the chaos. Could be someone trying to create a barrier. Could be any number of causes. But smoke is now visible from outside the terminal and fire alarm systems are sounding throughout that structure. The problem is that fire suppression teams can't safely enter Terminal 1 because it's controlled by infected, which means the fire is going to spread unchecked. A terminal fire at an airport with fuel trucks and aircraft nearby creates cascading danger well beyond just the structure that's burning. Passengers who were on aircraft parked at Terminal 1 gates are now trying to evacuate across the tarmac on foot because they can't safely deplane into the terminal. We're watching from our window as hundreds of people stream across active taxiways, carrying luggage and children, trying to reach other terminals or find any kind of safety. Ground crews are attempting to direct them away from aircraft operations. But it's chaos and someone is going to get hurt from the aircraft danger, even before you consider the infected individuals who are also moving across the tarmac. The situation is deteriorating faster than response can keep pace. At 1:41 p.m., Dr. Reynolds estimated that there are now at least 1,000 infected individuals spread across all terminals, with the number doubling approximately every 40 to 50 minutes as each infected person creates multiple new infections during their active phase. If his math is correct, we're looking at 2,000 infected by 2:30 p.m., 4,000 by 3:15 p.m., 8,000 by 4 p.m., and so on until either intervention stops the spread or the supply of uninfected people is exhausted. At 1:49 p.m., I need to pause our regular reporting for just a moment to say something directly to everyone who's been listening to this broadcast for the past 2.5 hours. If this frequency is helping you understand what's happening, if the information we're providing is helping you make better decisions about your safety, if knowing that someone is out here documenting this crisis makes you feel less alone, then please stay with us. We're going to continue broadcasting for as long as we possibly can. Sarah and I are committed to being your eyes and ears, to providing the best information available, and to helping coordinate between survivors and authorities. More updates will follow, and we're not going anywhere. Part 2, Concourse C, The Spread. This is Outbreak FM, 107.3 FM. And I'm David Morgan, continuing our emergency coverage from JFK International Airport. It's now 1:56 p.m., nearly 3 hours since the first incident was reported at Gate 47 in Terminal 1. And the situation has deteriorated in ways that I don't think anyone could have predicted even an hour ago. Sarah Chen is here with me monitoring multiple emergency frequencies, and we're going to walk you through everything that's developed in the last few minutes, because the information landscape is changing faster than any single agency can track. At 1:52 p.m., the Port Authority Police Department made the extremely difficult decision to abandon Terminal 5. Officers who were attempting to maintain security inside that terminal reported being overwhelmed by infected individuals, with estimates suggesting there are now at least 400 infected moving through Terminal 5's 3 concourses. The decision was made to evacuate all remaining law enforcement to defensible positions in Terminals 2, 3, 4, and 7. Which means Terminal 5 is now effectively lost, just like Terminal 1. We're looking at 2 entire terminals, representing roughly 40% of JFK's passenger capacity, that are no longer under any kind of security control. The challenge with Terminal 5 specifically is that it's the largest terminal at JFK, home to JetBlue operations, designed to handle 16 million passengers annually through 29 gates. On a normal Friday afternoon, it would have somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 people inside. Between departing passengers, arriving passengers, airport employees, and retail staff, we don't know how many of those people successfully evacuated before the terminal was abandoned. How many are still trapped inside hiding from infected, and how many have already been killed or transformed. The uncertainty is almost worse than knowing definite bad news. Sarah just received an update from her producer contact at CNN who's monitoring this situation. From their Manhattan bureau, they're reporting that video footage from inside Terminal 5 is being uploaded to social media, showing scenes that look like something from a horror film. Infected individuals attacking travelers in gate seating areas, people trying to barricade themselves inside bathrooms and shops, families running through concourses carrying children, airport employees attempting to defend themselves with whatever objects they can grab. From retail locations, the footage is graphic, it's disturbing, and it's going viral globally, which means the whole world is now watching what's happening at JFK in real time. At 2:04 p.m. we got confirmation that at least 37 aircraft are still parked at gates in Terminals 1 and 5 with passengers and crew still aboard. These aircraft can't push back from the gates because ground crews have evacuated. They can't safely deplane passengers into terminals that are overrun with infected, and they can't remain at the gates indefinitely because they're running out of fuel for auxiliary power and environmental systems. Flight attendants are making announcements telling passengers to remain seated and calm, but you can hear the fear in their voices on the cabin recordings being shared online. They know they're trapped, and they don't know what's going to happen. The tower at JFK ceased normal air traffic control operations at 2:09 p.m. All controllers have been relocated to backup facilities away from the main tower structure because there are reports of infected individuals in the terminal areas directly below the tower. Aircraft that are still taxiing are being given basic movement instructions, but there's no coordinated traffic management happening anymore. Pilots are essentially operating on see-and-avoid procedures, trying not to hit each other or the hundreds of people on foot crossing the taxiways. Dr. Reynolds called in again at 2:14 p.m. with information that fundamentally changes the danger assessment. He's examined the bodies of 3 infected individuals who were killed by police headshots, and he's made a disturbing discovery about the pathogen. Even after death, even after brain destruction stops the reanimation, the bodily fluids of infected individuals appear to remain infectious. He tested this by exposing blood samples from dead infected to healthy tissue cultures and observed the same cellular changes that occur in living infected individuals. What this means practically is that blood, saliva, and other fluids from infected individuals remain hazardous even after the infected person is killed, which creates ongoing contamination risk in any area where infected have been neutralized. This finding has massive implications for cleanup and recovery. You can't just shoot infected individuals and leave their bodies where they fall. Every corpse is a biohazard that continues presenting infection risk to anyone who comes into contact with it. Terminal areas where dozens or hundreds of infected have been killed are essentially contaminated zones that will require hazmat-level decontamination before they can be safely occupied again. We're not just dealing with an active outbreak, we're dealing with environmental contamination that will persist long after the last infected individual is neutralized. At 2:21 p.m., the New York City Emergency Management Department activated the city's Emergency Operations Center and began coordinating with federal authorities on a response plan. The challenge they're facing is that standard pandemic response protocols assume you're dealing with a disease that spreads through the air or through casual contact and requires isolation and medical treatment. What we're facing is something that spreads through bites, kills within an hour, causes reanimation of the dead, and has no available treatment. None of the existing playbooks cover this scenario, which means officials are improvising responses in real time while dealing with a threat. That's doubling every 45 minutes. Sarah's brother finally made contact at 2:27 p.m. He's alive and he's barricaded inside a storage room in the Terminal 5 retail area with 6 other employees. They have food and water from the shop inventory. They have a secure door that locks from inside, and they can hear infected individuals moving through the concourse outside, but haven't been directly threatened. Sarah's relief is visible, and she's fighting back tears while continuing to monitor communications. Her brother asked her what they should do, and the honest answer is that we don't know. Staying secured where they are seems safer than trying to move through Terminal 5 to reach an exit, but staying means waiting for rescue that might not come for hours. The long-term parking situation reached a breaking point at 2:33 p.m. when multiple vehicles attempted to crash through exit gates, rather than wait in the gridlocked lanes. Port Authority police responded, but they're spread too thin to maintain control at every exit point, which means some people are successfully forcing their way out, while others are still trapped in the lots. The problem is that some of the people evacuating from parking are infected individuals who made it out of the terminals before showing symptoms, which means infection is definitely spreading beyond airport property now into surrounding neighborhoods. At 2:38 p.m. we received our first confirmed report of infection. Outside the airport perimeter, a taxi driver who picked up a passenger from Terminal 4 approximately 90 minutes ago noticed his passenger becoming agitated and feverish during the drive into Manhattan. The passenger attacked the driver at a red light in Queens, biting him on the shoulder before the driver was able to escape the vehicle. The passenger is now loose somewhere in Queens, potentially attacking other people, while the driver presented himself to a local hospital emergency room, where he's being held in isolation. This is confirmation that the infection has breached containment at JFK and is now in the general New York population. The NYPD activated its emergency response protocols at 2:44 p.m. and began deploying additional units to create a perimeter around JFK airport property. The goal is to prevent anyone else from leaving the airport grounds until they can be screened for infection. But establishing that perimeter requires hundreds of officers, and there are multiple exit routes from the airport complex, including roads, paths through undeveloped areas, and even waterways along Jamaica Bay. A perfect perimeter is probably impossible, but even a partial perimeter might slow the rate at which infected individuals spread into surrounding communities. At 2:51 p.m., Sarah's monitoring radio traffic indicating that Terminal 2 is under heavy assault from infected individuals. This terminal primarily serves Delta Airlines and had roughly 6,000 people inside. When the lockdown was implemented, security forces are attempting to create defendable strong points within the terminal, concentrating resources at specific choke points rather than trying to protect the entire structure. They're directing uninfected people to rally at these strong points, where armed officers can provide protection. But getting thousands of panicked travelers to move in an organized way through a terminal where infected are hunting is proving nearly impossible. The CDC Rapid Response Team finally arrived at JFK at 2:57 p.m., nearly 4 hours after being initially dispatched. They immediately established a command post in one of the airport's administrative buildings that's away from the terminal chaos, and they began coordinating with local health authorities and law enforcement. The team lead, Dr. Patricia Chen, gave a brief radio interview where she acknowledged that they're dealing with something completely outside their experience, and that standard disease containment protocols don't apply when the infectious agent causes reanimation of the dead. She committed to working with researchers to understand the pathogen, but she was very clear that developing treatment or prevention will take time measured in weeks or months, not hours. At 3:04 p.m., one of the parked aircraft at Terminal 1 caught fire. We don't know if this was mechanical failure, electrical issues, or something related to the chaos in the terminal, but a Boeing 737 parked at Gate 12 is now burning, and the fire is spreading to adjacent aircraft. Fuel trucks that service planes are parked throughout the terminal apron area, and if the fire reaches those trucks, we're looking at massive explosions that could destroy substantial sections of the terminal complex and potentially spread to other terminals. The New York National Guard advance elements arrived at JFK at 3:11 p.m., ahead of schedule due to prioritization by the governor. Approximately 200 soldiers with armored vehicles and heavy weapons established positions at key access points around the airport perimeter. Their immediate mission is to reinforce the NYPD perimeter and prevent further exodus of potentially infected individuals. But their secondary mission is to prepare for possible combat operations inside the terminals if civilian law enforcement is unable to regain control. Having military forces on site changes the capability matrix significantly, but it also represents an acknowledgement that this situation may require military-level force to resolve. At 3:17 p.m., we received our first report of an infected individual being killed by a civilian rather than law enforcement. A passenger in Terminal 4, a man named Marcus, who identified himself as former military, used a fire extinguisher to kill an infected individual who was attacking a family with small children. Marcus described hitting the infected individual repeatedly in the head until it stopped moving, which matches what we know about the need for brain destruction to stop reanimated individuals. He's shaken by what he had to do, but he also recognizes that he saved lives by acting when no security personnel were immediately available. This raises the question of whether civilians should be attempting to fight infected individuals, or whether they should focus solely on hiding and waiting for professional responders. The fire at Terminal 1 spread to 2 additional aircraft by 3:23 p.m., and firefighting crews made the decision that they cannot safely approach the fire while infected individuals control that terminal. The fire is going to burn until it either exhausts available fuel or spreads to a point where it threatens structures beyond Terminal 1. We're watching from our position as a column of black smoke rises hundreds of feet into the air, visible for miles, broadcasting to everyone in New York City that something catastrophic is happening at JFK, even if they haven't been following news coverage. At 3:29 p.m., Dr. Reynolds provided an update that offers our first piece of genuinely positive information in hours. He's been tracking the timeline of the earliest infected individuals from this morning, and he's observed that infected who have been active for approximately 4 hours are beginning to show signs of deterioration. Their movements are becoming less coordinated. They're slower, they're less responsive to stimuli, and in one case an infected individual simply collapsed and stopped moving entirely despite showing no signs of external damage. If his observations are correct, infected individuals have a functional lifespan of somewhere between 4 and 6 hours before biological degradation makes them unable to continue hunting and attacking. This doesn't solve our immediate crisis, but it does suggest that infected individuals are not permanent threats. If you can survive and avoid infection for 6 hours after an infected individual is created, that specific infected becomes much less dangerous. If you can survive for 12 hours, most of the first wave infected will be neutralized by their own biological breakdown. This is critical strategic information because it means time is on our side. If we can hold defensive positions long enough for the infected population to degrade. At 3:36 p.m., Port Authority made the decision to shut down all utilities to Terminals 1 and 5. Power, water, heating, cooling, all of it is being cut off to those terminals in an attempt to make them less hospitable, and potentially to slow the movement of infected individuals. The downside is that this also affects any uninfected people still trapped inside those terminals, leaving them in dark, climaton-controlled spaces with no ability to call for help through landline phones or other powered communication systems. It's another brutal triage decision prioritizing the larger good over the welfare of individuals who are already in desperate circumstances. Sarah just received word that Terminal 7, which primarily handles international carriers, is implementing a creative defensive strategy. Security personnel are using the terminal's gate areas as safe zones, creating defensible perimeters around each gate by blocking the jet bridges, and using the aircraft themselves as refuge. Uninfected people are being directed to specific gates where they can board aircraft that are empty and secure, essentially using the planes as bunkers while infected individuals roam the concourses. It's an improvised solution, but it appears to be working, allowing several hundred people to shelter safely while security forces work to clear the terminal. At 3:44 p.m. we got confirmation that the infection has reached the JFK Airtrain Maintenance Facility. Employees who work on the automated train system reported infected individuals entering the facility, and maintenance workers evacuated to the rail yard where they're currently surrounded by infected W. With no clear escape route, the airtrain system is already shut down. But this incident highlights how infection is spreading to every corner of the airport complex, not just the passenger terminals. Every building, every vehicle, every space where people work or gather is potentially compromised. The first National Guard combat operation inside a terminal occurred at 3:51 p.m. when a squad of soldiers entered Terminal 2 to evacuate a group of airport employees who were trapped in an administrative office. The soldiers used coordinated fire to clear a path through approximately 15 infected individuals, successfully extracted 23 employees, and withdrew without any soldiers being bitten or infected. This operation demonstrated that trained military units with appropriate tactics can successfully operate in the infected environment, which provides a model for future extraction and clearing operations. At 3:57 p.m., Sarah's monitoring reports that some commercial pilots are making independent decisions to start their aircraft and attempt to taxi away from gates. Without ground crew support or air traffic control clearance, these pilots see infected individuals approaching their aircraft across the tarmac. They feel responsible for the safety of passengers and crew aboard their planes, and they're choosing to move their aircraft to remote parking areas away from the terminal chaos. Even though this violates every normal aviation procedure, we're watching aircraft taxi in uncoordinated patterns across the airport, creating collision hazards, but also possibly saving lives by removing people from immediate danger. The CDC team established a field laboratory at 4:03 p.m. using equipment they brought with them and additional supplies requisitioned from local hospitals. They're analyzing blood samples from infected individuals, tissue samples from victims, and environmental samples from contaminated areas trying to understand the pathogen. At a molecular level, Dr. Chen acknowledged this research will take time, but understanding how the infection works at a cellular level is the first step toward potentially developing any kind of treatment or prevention. At 4:09 p.m., we received multiple reports that infected individuals are learning or adapting their behavior. Security personnel in Terminal 4 described infected individuals using coordinated group tactics to overwhelm defensive positions, moving together in ways that seem purposeful rather than random. Dr. Reynolds cautioned against attributing too much intelligence to this behavior, noting that even simple organisms can exhibit complex group behaviors through basic response patterns, but the practical effect is the same. Infected individuals moving in coordinated groups are much more dangerous than individuals attacking separately. The Port Authority Executive Director held a brief press conference at 4:14 p.m., the first official public statement beyond the initial medical emergency announcement. He confirmed that JFK Airport is experiencing an unprecedented crisis involving a highly contagious pathogen that causes extreme behavioral changes, and that normal airport operations are suspended indefinitely. He urged anyone in surrounding communities to avoid the airport area, to report any violent or unusual behavior to 911 immediately, and to shelter in place rather than attempting to evacuate, unless specifically instructed by authorities. He did not use the word zombie. He did not describe the reanimation phenomenon, and he did not provide casualty figures, which suggests officials are still trying to manage public panic by controlling information flow. At 4:21 p.m., Sarah's brother reported that infected individuals are attempting to break into the storage room, where he's sheltering. He can hear them outside the door, pounding and scratching, and he's terrified the door won't hold. We advised him to barricade the door with anything available, stay quiet to avoid attracting more infected, and be prepared to defend himself if the door fails. Sarah's struggling to maintain professional composure while her brother is in immediate danger, and I don't know how to help her except to let her keep working, because staying focused on the broadcast is probably the only thing keeping her from completely falling apart. The fire at Terminal 1 reached the fuel trucks at 4:28 p.m., resulting in a series of massive explosions that were felt across the entire airport complex. The blast destroyed what remained of Terminal 1's structure, created secondary fires in nearby buildings, and sent debris raining down across hundreds of yards. The explosions were so powerful that windows shattered in Terminal 2 nearly half a mile away. We don't know how many people were still inside Terminal 1 when it exploded, but given that it was overrun with infected and abandoned by security forces, the casualty count is likely to be catastrophic. At 4:34 p.m., I need to take another moment to speak directly to everyone who's been listening to this broadcast. For the past 5 hours, if you're trapped somewhere at JFK, if you're in one of the surrounding communities wondering if you're safe, if you're anywhere in the region trying to understand what's happening, we're going to stay on this frequency and continue providing information as long as we possibly can. Sarah and I are committed to being your source for accurate real-time updates. We're not going anywhere. We're here with you through this crisis. Stay tuned for more updates. The National Guard perimeter around JFK achieved operational status at 4:41 p.m., with approximately 800 soldiers now positioned to prevent unauthorized exit from airport property. Checkpoints are established on all major roads, observation posts are monitoring undeveloped areas, and patrol boats are covering the waterways. The perimeter isn't perfect, but it's significantly reducing the number of people leaving the airport grounds, which should slow the spread of infection into the wider community. At 4:47 p.m., Sarah's brother stopped responding to her messages. She sent multiple texts and tried calling repeatedly, but there's no answer. We don't know if his phone died, if he's staying silent to avoid attracting infected, or if something worse has happened. Sarah's trying to stay focused, but I can see her hands shaking as she monitors the communications board. The CDC laboratory preliminary results came back at 4:53 p.m. with information that's both fascinating and terrifying. The pathogen appears to be a prion, a misfolded protein that causes other proteins to misfold in a cascade effect, similar to mad cow disease, but operating at a vastly accelerated rate. Prions are incredibly difficult to destroy, resistant to heat and chemical disinfection, and capable of remaining infectious in the environment for extended periods. If this is accurate, it means contaminated areas will remain hazardous long after infected individuals are cleared, and standard cleaning procedures won't be sufficient to eliminate the infection risk. At 5:04 p.m., terminal to foul. Security forces exhausted ammunition attempting to hold defensive positions, were overrun by hundreds of infected individuals, and evacuated to Terminal 3. We now have 3 terminals completely lost to infected, which is half of JFK's terminal capacity. The remaining 3 terminals are under siege with dwindling security forces, limited ammunition, and tens of thousands of people still trapped inside seeking protection. The sun began to set at 5:17 p.m., and I need everyone to understand that darkness is going to make this situation exponentially worse. Infected individuals appear to have the same vision limitations as living humans, but they also don't hesitate, don't fear, and don't tire. Darkness will make it harder for security forces to identify and engage threats, harder for civilians to avoid infected, and harder for anyone attempting evacuation to navigate safely. The next 12 hours until sunrise are going to be the most dangerous period of this entire crisis. At 5:23 p.m., military commanders on site requested and received authorization to use heavy weapons inside terminals if necessary. This means machine guns, grenades, and potentially even more substantial ordnance if the situation continues deteriorating. The authorization comes with acknowledgement that using such weapons in enclosed spaces with civilians present will result in collateral casualties. But the calculus is that allowing infected to overwhelm the remaining terminals will result in even higher casualties. Sarah's brother sent a single text message at 5:29 p.m. "They're inside. Love you." Then nothing. Sarah's crying now while trying to continue working. I don't know what to say to her. I don't know if her brother is alive or dead or infected. All I can do is keep her focused on the broadcast, because helping others is the only thing giving any of this meaning. At 5:36 p.m., Dr. Reynolds reported that the 4 to 6 hour degradation timeline he observed earlier is holding up with additional data. Infected individuals from the initial outbreak at 11 a.m. are now 6.5 hours into their active phase, and are showing severe deterioration. Many are unable to walk, some are non-responsive even to nearby uninfected people, and several have simply stopped moving entirely. This is the first hard evidence that infected individuals have a limited functional lifespan, which means the crisis has a built-in endpoint if we can just survive long enough. The National Guard began offensive operations at 5:42 p.m., moving into Terminal 3 with orders to establish secure zones and evacuate as many uninfected people as possible before complete darkness. 200 soldiers advancing in coordinated formation using overwhelming firepower to clear infected from specific sections of the terminal. Early reports indicate they're making progress, but facing resistance from large groups of infected that are concentrating in response to the noise of combat. At 5:49 p.m., we received reports that some infected individuals from the initial outbreak are collapsing spontaneously as they reach the 7-hour mark of infection. Bodies are dropping where they stand, no longer animated, no longer threatening. If this pattern holds, it means the infected population has a hard limit around 7 hours of activity before biological breakdown ends their threat permanently. This is huge strategically, because it means every hour we survive, we're getting closer to the infected population neutralizing itself through natural degradation. The air train employees trapped in the maintenance yard were successfully extracted at 5:57 p.m. by a National Guard helicopter that landed in the rail yard, took on 15 personnel, and evacuated them to a secure location off airport property. It's a small victory in a day of devastating losses, but 15 people who thought they were going to die are now safe, and that matters. At 6:03 p.m., power failed across most of the airport complex. The utility shutdowns to Terminals 1 and 5, combined with fire damage to electrical infrastructure from the explosions, plus overload on remaining systems, has caused cascading failures that have left most of JFK in darkness. Emergency lighting is operating in some areas, but large sections of the terminals are now pitch black with tens of thousands of people inside trying to avoid infected in complete darkness. This is the scenario we feared most, and it's happening as night falls. The terminal for barricade at Gate 73 held against a major assault at 6:11 p.m. 60 infected individuals attacked the position where approximately 400 uninfected civilians are sheltering. But security forces and armed civilians working together managed to kill all 60 attackers without any defenders being bitten. It's proof that prepared defensive positions with adequate weapons and coordination can successfully resist even large groups of infected, which provides a template for survival through the night. At 6:17 p.m., we got confirmation that Sarah's brother is alive. He sent another message saying the infected that breached his storage room were degraded 7-hour infected who collapsed before reaching him. He's terrified. He's surrounded by dead bodies, but he's alive and uninfected. Sarah's sobbing with relief while trying to maintain her professional voice for the broadcast. This is what all of us are living through emotionally. Terror and hope and relief and grief all mixed together in ways that are almost impossible to process. The CDC laboratory confirmed at 6:24 p.m. that the pathogen is definitely prion-based, which has massive implications for treatment and decontamination. Prions can't be killed by normal means because they're not alive. They can only be destroyed by extreme heat or harsh chemicals. This means every surface touched by infected blood or saliva, every piece of equipment used in medical treatment, every section of terminal where infected have been present, all of it will require specialized decontamination that's far beyond normal cleaning procedures. The recovery timeline for JFK just extended from weeks to possibly months. At 6:31 p.m., National Guard forces completed establishment of a secure zone in Terminal 3, encompassing approximately 20% of the terminal's space. They've evacuated 800 civilians to this zone where they can be protected through the night by military forces with adequate weapons and ammunition. It's not enough space for everyone still trapped in Terminal 3, but it's a defensible position that can be held until sunrise, when additional operations can be conducted. The last commercial flight departed JFK at 6:38 p.m., a cargo aircraft that was already loaded and fueled when the crisis began. The pilot made the decision to depart without clearance, without ground crew support, and without any communication with authorities because staying on the ground meant eventual confrontation with infected. The aircraft safely reached altitude and diverted to Philadelphia, where it landed without incident. That departure marks the end of JFK as a functioning airport and the beginning of JFK as a quarantine zone. At 6:44 p.m., we're receiving reports that infection has been confirmed in Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn. The taxi driver who was bitten has transformed and attacked hospital staff. Other individuals who left JFK before showing symptoms have transformed in various locations. Around New York City, NYPD is responding to multiple violent incidents that match the pattern we've seen at JFK. The infection has definitely escaped the airport perimeter and is now spreading through the most densely populated city in America. What started as an airport crisis is becoming a citywide catastrophe. The temperature inside the terminals without climate control is dropping as of 6:51 p.m. It's November, temperatures outside are in the low 40s, and without heating systems running, the terminal interiors are going to get very cold overnight. This adds another survival challenge for the tens of thousands of people trapped inside, particularly children, elderly, and anyone with medical conditions that are exacerbated by cold temperatures. Hypothermia becomes a risk on top of everything else people are facing. At 6:57 p.m., Dr. Reynolds reported that all infected from the initial 11 a.m. outbreak have now degraded to the point of being non-threatening. The earliest infected are now approximately 8 hours post-infection, and they're completely immobile, non-responsive, essentially dead in any meaningful sense, even though cellular activity may continue. This confirms the 7 to 8 hour timeline for infected threat neutralization, which means that by midnight tonight, all infected from the first 3 hours of the outbreak will be neutralized through degradation. The infected population will begin shrinking if new infections stop occurring. The National Guard established forward operating bases at 7:04 p.m. at 3 locations around the airport perimeter. These bases will serve as staging areas for further operations into the terminals, as casualty collection points for evacuated civilians, and as coordination centers for the broader response effort. Having established military infrastructure in place improves response capability significantly and demonstrates commitment to sustained operations rather than just crisis containment. At 7:11 p.m., we received our first report of successful civilian self-rescue from the terminals. A group of 32 passengers working together fought their way out of Terminal 4, using improvised weapons, made it across the tarmac to the airport perimeter, and were picked up by National Guard forces. They suffered 2 casualties during the escape, both from infected attacks, but 30 people who thought they were trapped until rescued managed to save themselves through coordinated action. This is important because it shows that waiting for official rescue isn't the only option. If people are willing to accept risk and work together. The fire at Terminal 1 finally burned itself out at 7:19 p.m., leaving the entire terminal structure gutted and collapsed. The smoke is still rising, but there are no active flames. The terminal that served as the entry point to America for millions of international visitors is now a ruin, and the symbolic weight of that destruction is almost as heavy as the human cost. Terminal 1 represented connection, travel, human movement across borders, and now it's just smoking rubble filled with bodies. At 7:27 p.m., military engineers arrived on site with heavy equipment including bulldozers and earth-moving machinery. Their mission is to create physical barriers around the terminals to channel movement and create kill zones where infected can be engaged with maximum efficiency and minimum risk. They're also preparing to create mass burial sites for the bodies that are going to need disposal. Once the crisis is controlled, the engineering perspective brings a grim practicality to the situation that's necessary, but emotionally difficult to process. Sarah's monitoring social media at 7:34 p.m. and she's seeing that what's happening at JFK has become the dominant global news story. Video footage, eyewitness accounts, and official statements are being aggregated and analyzed by billions of people worldwide. Some countries are closing their borders entirely. Others are implementing quarantines for anyone who recently traveled through New York. And there's growing demand for answers about how this happened and whether it could happen elsewhere. JFK isn't just a local crisis anymore. It's a global event that's changing how the world thinks about travel, public health, and biological security. Part 3, Runway 13R, The Long Night. This is Outbreak FM, 107.3 FM. And I'm David Morgan, continuing what has now become a marathon emergency broadcast from JFK International Airport. It's 7:42 p.m. We're 8.5 hours into this crisis, and we're entering what is going to be the longest and most dangerous night that any of us have ever experienced. Sarah Chen is still here monitoring communications, despite everything she's been through personally today, and we're committed to staying on this frequency, providing information for as long as our power holds, and as long as we remain safe in this broadcast position. At 7:39 p.m., the National Guard commander on site, Colonel Sarah Martinez, gave her first direct briefing to media, which we're receiving through our connections with other news organizations. Colonel Martinez confirmed that military forces have established secure zones in Terminals 3, and for protecting approximately 3,200 civilians, that offensive operations are planned to continue through the night to expand those secure zones, and that the primary mission is protecting uninfected individuals while working to neutralize the infected population. She acknowledged that they're facing an enemy unlike anything in military doctrine, that standard combat tactics are being adapted in real time, and that casualties among both civilians and military personnel are significant, though she wouldn't provide specific numbers. The temperature inside Terminal 4 where we're located has dropped to 53 degrees. As of 7:47 p.m., Sarah and I are wearing our jackets, and we can see our breath when we talk. The thousands of people sheltering in the terminal are huddling together for warmth, sharing blankets taken from aircraft, and trying to stay calm despite the cold adding to their fear and discomfort. Some of the children are crying from the cold. Parents are trying to comfort them, and the whole situation is just heartbreaking to witness, even as we try to remain detached enough To continue reporting, at 7:54 p.m., we received confirmation that the infection has reached LaGuardia Airport. A passenger who departed JFK on one of the last flights before the ground stop landed at LaGuardia showed symptoms in the terminal and attacked other travelers before being killed by Port Authority police. LaGuardia has implemented immediate lockdown procedures trying to prevent a repeat of what happened at JFK. But the fact that infection has reached a second major airport suggests the containment perimeter failed earlier than we realized. We don't know if infection has also reached Newark or other regional airports, but the assumption has to be that anywhere with recent arrivals from JFK is potentially compromised. The first National Guard casualties occurred at 8:03 p.m. During clearing operations in Terminal 3. 2 soldiers were bitten by infected individuals during close quarters combat in a narrow corridor, where they couldn't maintain safe engagement distance. Both soldiers were immediately pulled from the line and placed in medical isolation, where they'll be monitored through the progression timeline. Their fellow soldiers are dealing with the knowledge that 2 of their brothers in arms are going to die within the next hour, and there's nothing anyone can do to save them. This is the psychological weight that military personnel are carrying while conducting operations that are already physically and tactically demanding. Drive, Reynolds provided an 8-hour status update at 8:11 p.m. He's now tracked 37 individual infected from initial exposure through complete degradation, and he's able to provide refined timeline data. Symptom onset averages 6 minutes post-exposure. Full cognitive collapse averages 18 minutes. Clinical death averages 38 minutes. Reanimation averages to 0.7 minutes post-death. Active hunting phase lasts 6 to 8 hours with decreasing effectiveness over time. Complete immobilization occurs at 7 to 9 hours post-infection. The data is remarkably consistent across all observed cases, which suggests the pathogen follows a very predictable course once infection occurs. At 8:17 p.m., Sarah's brother was successfully evacuated from Terminal 5 by a National Guard extraction team. He's cold, he's traumatized, he's dehydrated, but he's alive and uninfected, and he's being transported to a field hospital, where he'll receive medical evaluation and psychological support. Sarah completely broke down when she got the news, and we had to take her off the air for 10 minutes while she collected herself. She's back now, still tearful but functional, and the relief in her voice is palpable every time she speaks. This is the first unambiguously good news we've been able to report in hours. The NYPD reported at 8:24 p.m. that they're responding to infected-related incidents. In all 5 boroughs of New York City, the infection that started at JFK has spread throughout the metropolitan area through the normal movement of people who were exposed at the airport, showed no symptoms when they left, and then transformed after reaching their homes or workplaces elsewhere in the city. Each of those individuals created new exposure events, and those secondary exposures are now creating tertiary infections in a cascading pattern that's overwhelming the NYPD's response capacity. What was an airport crisis this morning is now a citywide emergency that's consuming every available emergency service resource. At 8:31 p.m., the CDC expanded their assessment from localized outbreak to potential pandemic scenario. Dr. Patricia Chen stated in a briefing that given the rapid transmission rate, the short incubation period, and the confirmed presence of infection in multiple locations, they're treating this as a pandemic-level threat requiring coordinated national response. She's recommending that all airports nationwide implement enhanced screening, that travel from the New York area be restricted, and that hospitals prepare for potential infected patients by establishing isolation protocols. This is the CDC essentially confirming that what started at JFK could spread globally if aggressive containment measures aren't implemented immediately. The 2 National Guard soldiers who were bitten died at 8:37 p.m. and 8:41 p.m. respectively, following the expected timeline. Both were euthanized immediately after clinical death and before reanimation could occur, which was a mercy to them and a safety measure for everyone else. Their commanding officer made the decision to euthanize personally, rather than asking any other soldier to kill their own comrades, which is a burden of leadership that no one should have to bear. Colonel Martinez announced that both soldiers will receive full military honors, and that their sacrifice in defense of civilians will be formally recognized once the immediate crisis is resolved. At 8:49 p.m., we got reports that some passengers who were trapped in aircraft at Terminal 5 gates managed to use the emergency slides to evacuate onto the tarmac, and are now making their way across the airport on foot trying to reach secure areas. There are approximately 40 people in this group, including families with children, and they're navigating in near total darkness across active taxiways. While trying to avoid both aircraft and infected, military forces are attempting to locate them using thermal imaging equipment and guide them to safety. But the coordination is difficult when communication is limited and visibility is minimal. The fire department responded at 8:56 p.m. to a new fire in Terminal 2, caused by desperate survivors trying to create light and heat using improvised torches. The fire spread to terminal furnishings and created heavy smoke that's making breathing difficult throughout that terminal. Firefighters can't safely enter Terminal 2 to suppress the fire because of infected presence, which means the fire is going to burn until it exhausts fuel or burns through to areas without combustible materials. People trapped in Terminal 2 are now facing threats from infected, from cold, and from smoke inhalation. At 9:04 p.m., and I want to address this directly to everyone who's been with us for nearly 10 hours now. We're going to continue this broadcast through the entire night. Sarah and I have supplies here. We have backup power, and we have a secure position. We're not leaving. If this broadcast is helping you stay informed, if it's helping you feel less alone, if the information we're providing is helping you make better decisions, then we're going to be here for you. We're in this together, and we're going to get through this night together. Stay with us. The National Guard began using illumination flares at 9:11 p.m. to light up areas of the terminals during clearing operations. The flares create harsh shadows and the light is irregular, but it's dramatically better than operating in complete darkness. The flares also have a psychological effect, making infected individuals easier to see, and therefore less frightening to the defenders who are engaging them. There's something about fighting an enemy you can clearly see that's less terrifying than fighting in darkness, even though the actual threat level hasn't changed. At 9:17 p.m., military engineers completed the first containment barrier around Terminal 5, using shipping containers and construction materials. This barrier prevents infected from leaving Terminal 5 and spreading to other areas, but it also traps any remaining uninfected people inside that terminal with no way out, unless they can somehow signal for rescue. It's another brutal calculation where the collective good requires accepting individual tragedy. The CDC laboratory identified the specific prion structure at 9:23 p.m., and it doesn't match any known prion disease. This is a novel prion, possibly engineered, possibly a natural mutation, but definitely something that hasn't been seen before in medical literature. Dr. Chen stated that the novelty of the prion means they're working from first principles, trying to understand its behavior, and that developing any kind of treatment will require research timelines measured in months or years, not days or weeks. For practical purposes, this confirms that there will be no medical cavalry arriving to cure infected individuals or prevent infection in exposed individuals. Survival depends entirely on avoiding exposure. At 9:29 p.m., Sarah received a message from a listener who's trapped in Terminal 4 asking whether they should try to sleep or stay awake through the night. It's a good question that we hadn't directly addressed. Dr. Reynolds provided guidance suggesting that if you're in a secured location, with other people maintaining watch, sleeping in shifts is reasonable because rest will improve decision-making and physical capability tomorrow. However, if you're alone or in an unsecured location, staying awake is safer because infected can attack without warning, and you need to be alert to respond. The advice highlights how every decision right now has life or death implications. The group of passengers who evacuated from Terminal 5 via emergency slides successfully reached a National Guard position at 9:36 p.m. All 40 people survived the crossing, though several suffered minor injuries from falls in the darkness, and 2 are suffering from severe cold exposure. They're being treated and moved to the secure civilian area in Terminal 3. It's a remarkable story of people refusing to wait for rescue. and instead taking their fate into their own hands, and it worked. At 9:44 p.m., power was partially restored to Terminal 4 through emergency generators. We have lighting in some sections. Climate control is starting to work again, and the improvement in morale is immediate and visible. People who were huddling in darkness are moving to lighted areas. Children are calming down, and the overall sense of despair is lifting slightly. It's amazing how much difference something as simple as electric light makes when you've been in darkness for hours. The NYPD requested National Guard support at 9:51 p.m. to deal with infected incidents. Throughout New York City, they're asking for military units to be deployed to Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx to assist with securing hospitals, protecting evacuation routes, and engaging large groups of infected that are overwhelming civilian law enforcement. The request represents an acknowledgement that the NYPD can't handle this crisis alone, and that military support is necessary to prevent complete breakdown of order. In America's largest city, at 9:58 p.m., we received reports that several aircraft that departed JFK earlier today before the ground stop are reporting passengers showing symptoms mid-flight. Flights to Los Angeles, Miami, London, and Paris all have confirmed symptomatic passengers who are being restrained by flight crews, while the aircraft make emergency landings at the nearest suitable airports. This confirms that infection spread beyond New York before containment measures were in place, and we're now looking at potential outbreak situations at multiple airports worldwide. The pandemic scenario that the CDC warned about is actively unfolding. Dr. Reynolds reported at 10:06 p.m. that he's observing something unexpected in the 9-hour-plus infected. Some of them are showing signs of cellular regeneration, almost like the prion damage is reversing or stabilizing. It's too early to draw conclusions, but if infected individuals can somehow recover after the initial degradation phase, that would completely change the threat assessment. He's continuing to monitor these cases and will provide updates as he gathers more data. But for now, this is just an interesting observation rather than actionable intelligence. At 10:13 p.m., Colonel Martinez announced that military forces will attempt a major clearing operation in Terminal 2 starting at midnight. The goal is to eliminate or drive out all infected individuals from Terminal 2, using overwhelming force, then secure the terminal and evacuate all remaining civilians to safety. It's an ambitious operation that will require coordination of multiple units, extensive ammunition expenditure, and accepting casualties among both military and civilian populations. But Martinez believes it's necessary to prevent Terminal 2 from becoming a complete loss like Terminal 1. The temperature outside dropped to 38 degrees at 10:19 p.m., and inside the unheated terminals, it's approaching 45 degrees. Hypothermia is becoming a real medical issue, particularly for children and elderly. The field hospitals are treating dozens of cases of cold-related illness, and doctors are worried that overnight temperatures could drop enough to cause life-threatening hypothermia even for healthy adults. People are being advised to stay in groups, share body heat, keep moving periodically to maintain circulation, and use any available materials for insulation. At 10:27 p.m., we received confirmation that the infection has reached Europe. The flight to Paris that departed JFK this morning landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport with multiple symptomatic passengers who transformed in the terminal and attacked airport personnel and other travelers. French authorities have locked down the terminal and are implementing containment procedures, but the infection is now active on European soil. We're watching in real time as what started in one terminal at JFK this morning becomes a global crisis affecting multiple continents. The National Guard perimeter around JFK engaged approximately 50 infected individuals, attempting to leave the airport grounds at 10:34 p.m. All 50 were neutralized using coordinated fire from multiple positions, demonstrating that the perimeter is functioning as intended to prevent infected from spreading into surrounding neighborhoods. However, the engagement also demonstrated that infected individuals are still attempting to leave the airport in significant numbers, which means the interior terminals still contain large infected populations that haven't been neutralized. At 10:41 p.m., Sarah's monitoring reports that some of the degraded infected from the earliest infections are showing renewed activity. Infected that had become completely immobile are starting to move again, slowly and uncoordinatedly, but definitely active when they were inactive before. This matches Dr. Reynolds' observation about cellular regeneration, and it's extremely concerning, because it suggests infected individuals might not have a permanent endpoint to their threat. If they degrade for several hours, but then regenerate and become active again, the entire timeline-based survival strategy becomes invalid. The midnight clearing operation for Terminal 2 was moved up to 11 p.m. based on intelligence suggesting that infected in that terminal are starting to concentrate near the secure zones where uninfected people are sheltering. Colonel Martinez made the decision to attack while military forces have the initiative, rather than waiting and potentially facing a coordinated assault by infected. At 10:49 p.m., units began moving into position for the operation. At 10:56 p.m., we received our first report of successful civilian-made weapons being used effectively against infected. A group of passengers in Terminal 7 fashioned spears from metal railing and used them to kill multiple infected while maintaining distance that prevented bites. They're sharing their technique with other survivors and demonstrating that improvised weapons can be effective if people are willing to fight, rather than just hide. This is empowering information for civilians who feel helpless and shows that survival doesn't require military weapons if you're creative and brave. The terminal to clearing operation began at 11:03 p.m. with artillery-level noise. As multiple machine gun positions opened fire simultaneously, we can hear the gunfire from our position and see the muzzle flashes through the windows. The operation is creating a wall of fire through sections of the terminal, killing anything that moves, and the brutality of it is difficult to witness even knowing it's necessary. This is industrial-scale violence being applied to infected who used to be human beings, with families and lives and futures. At 11:11 p.m., Dr. Reynolds confirmed that the regeneration he observed is real and consistent. Infected who reach the 8 to 9 hour mark degrade to immobility, but then at the 10 to 12 hour mark they begin recovering function and can become active again. The good news is that regenerated infected are significantly impaired compared to fresh infected, slower and less coordinated, but they're still capable of biting and transmitting infection. This means the safe timeline isn't 7 hours, it's indefinite until infected are permanently neutralized through brain destruction. The clearing operation in Terminal 2 is encountering heavy resistance at 11:19 p.m. Infected are present in much larger numbers than expected, possibly because infected from other areas have been drawn to Terminal 2 by the noise and activity. Military units are fighting room to room through the terminal, taking casualties, expending enormous amounts of ammunition, and making slower progress than planned. Colonel Martinez is committing reserve forces to maintain momentum and prevent the operation from stalling. At 11:26 p.m., we're receiving reports from London that Heathrow Airport is implementing emergency lockdown after symptomatic passengers from the JFK flight attacked people in the arrivals area. The infection is active in the United Kingdom now, with all the same exponential spread potential that we saw at JFK. European authorities are scrambling to implement containment while they're several hours behind us. In understanding what they're facing, we have the benefit of 8 hours of hard lessons learned, and we're trying to share that information with international authorities to help them avoid our mistakes. The civilian casualty count from the terminal to clearing operation is significant. As of 11:34 p.m., at least 20 uninfected civilians have been killed by military fire, either caught in crossfire or misidentified as infected in the chaos of combat. It's tragic and unavoidable, and Colonel Martinez acknowledged in a radio communication that accepting these casualties is the cost of saving the larger population. She's taking full responsibility for those deaths and stated that she'd rather live with the guilt of killing 20 innocents than the knowledge that thousands died, because she hesitated to act. At 11:41 p.m., the regeneration timeline was further refined. Infected reach peak degradation at R9, remain immobile for approximately 2 hours, and then begin regenerating at R11. Regenerated infected are active, but impaired for an unknown duration before presumably degrading again. Dr. Reynolds speculates this might be a cyclical pattern where infected degrade and regenerate repeatedly until tissue damage accumulates to a point where regeneration is no longer possible. But he needs more observation time to confirm. The Terminal 2 operation achieved its primary objective at 11:49 p.m. Military forces established control of the main concourse and secured evacuation routes for civilians. Approximately 1,800 people are being evacuated from Terminal 2 to the secure area in Terminal 3, which is a major success despite the casualties incurred during the operation. This is the largest civilian rescue operation of the night, and it demonstrates that coordinated military action could successfully clear terminals if sufficient force is applied. At 11:56 p.m., we're approaching midnight and the transition to a new day. Sarah and I have been broadcasting for over 12 hours continuously. We're exhausted, we're emotionally drained, we're surviving on adrenaline and coffee and determination. But we're going to continue because people are still listening, still trapped, still fighting for their lives and needing information. We're not stopping. We're here for the duration. Midnight arrived at exactly 12 a.m., and we're officially into Saturday now. Into day 2 of this crisis. If you're still listening, if you survived the first 12 hours, you're proving that survival is possible. You're evidence that human beings can endure unimaginable horror and keep functioning. Take a moment to acknowledge that you're alive. Then prepare for the next 12 hours because this isn't over. At 12:07 a.m., the National Guard reported that they've neutralized approximately 4,000 infected individuals since operations began. That number represents both fresh infected and degraded infected, both first wave and second wave infections. It's a staggering body count, and each one of those 4,000 was a human being who woke up yesterday morning with plans and hopes and no idea they'd be dead before tomorrow. The scale of human loss is almost incomprehensible. The CDC laboratory made a breakthrough at 12:14 a.m. They've identified that the prion has a specific molecular weakness that makes it vulnerable to certain targeted compounds. Developing a treatment will still take weeks, but they've at least identified a potential attack vector for pharmaceutical intervention. It's the first genuinely hopeful scientific news of this entire crisis, even though it won't help anyone who's already infected or exposed. At 12:21 a.m., we received reports that the infection has reached Los Angeles. The flight from JFK landed hours ago. Passengers dispersed into the city before showing symptoms, and now LAX is reporting incidents matching the JFK pattern. The infection is spreading across the United States at the speed of air travel, and every major city is potentially facing what New York is dealing with. This is no longer a local crisis or even a regional emergency. This is a national catastrophe that's unfolding in real time. The temperature inside Terminal 4 dropped to 42 degrees at 12:28 a.m. Despite the partial power restoration, the heating systems are overwhelmed by the volume of outside air infiltrating through damaged doors and windows. People are shivering, children are crying from the cold, and the medical staff are treating increasing numbers of hypothermia cases. Surviving the infected is one challenge. Surviving the cold is another, and both together create a survival scenario that's testing everyone's endurance. At 12:36 a.m., Colonel Martinez announced that military forces will conduct no further offensive operations. Tonight, they're transitioning to defensive posture, holding the secure zones they've established, and waiting for daylight when visibility improves and tactical advantages favor the defenders. This is acknowledgement that fighting infected in darkness is too costly in military casualties, and that patience is a better strategy than aggression when you're facing an enemy that degrades over time. The first confirmed infected animal was reported at 12:43 a.m. A security dog that was bitten by an infected passenger has transformed and attacked its handler before being killed. This raises the horrifying possibility that the infection can cross species barriers, which would mean any mammal could potentially become a vector. If pets, if wildlife, if livestock can be infected and transmit to humans, the containment challenge becomes exponentially more complex. Dr. Reynolds is investigating, but initial assessment suggests the prion can indeed affect multiple species. At 12:51 a.m., Sarah's brother was released from medical observation after being confirmed uninfected. and cleared psychologically. He's being housed in a shelter for evacuated airport personnel, and Sarah was able to speak with him briefly via radio. Hearing his voice, hearing him describe what he survived, it's almost too much for her to process. She's holding together but barely, and I'm amazed she's still functioning well enough to continue contributing to this broadcast. The National Guard perimeter engaged another large group of infected at 12:58 a.m. Approximately 100 individuals attempting to breach the perimeter simultaneously. The engagement required multiple units firing in coordination to neutralize all the infected before any reach the perimeter line. The frequency of these large-scale breach attempts is increasing, which suggests infected are either concentrating naturally or perhaps showing some kind of rudimentary group behavior that's making them more dangerous than individual random encounters. At 1:06 a.m., we received reports that regenerated infected are successfully attacking and infecting new victims. The impaired regenerated infected are still capable of spreading the infection, which means the threat doesn't diminish as quickly as we hoped. Based on the initial degradation observations, every infected individual remains a threat indefinitely until brain destruction occurs, regardless of how degraded they appear. This is crucial tactical information that changes defensive planning. The CDC issued nationwide guidance at 1:13 a.m. recommending that all airports immediately implement screening for symptoms, that anyone showing fever or behavioral changes be isolated immediately, and that local authorities prepare for potential outbreak scenarios in their jurisdictions. The guidance is essentially an acknowledgement that what happened at JFK could happen anywhere, and that every community needs to be ready to respond. It's too late for prevention at this point. We're into damage control and hoping to limit the spread. At 1:21 a.m., military engineers completed reinforced barriers around all remaining functional terminals. These barriers create defined perimeters that can be defended with minimum personnel, allowing military forces to concentrate at key points, rather than trying to defend the entire terminal footprint. It's a siege strategy adapted for defending against infected rather than human attackers, and it's based on letting infected exhaust themselves against barriers, rather than engaging every threat directly. The terminal for secure zone population reached 3,200 people at 1:28 a.m., which is approximately the maximum capacity for the space that's been secured. Colonel Martinez announced that no additional evacuees can be accepted until people are moved out to other locations, which means anyone still trapped in unsecured areas of Terminal 4 will have to wait for future operations or find their own way to safety. It's another impossible triage decision. At 1:36 a.m., Dr. Reynolds reported observing a regenerated infected individual that's now at R14 post-initial infection. This individual degraded completely at R9, regenerated at R11, and has remained active through R14 with no sign of second degradation. The cyclical pattern he theorized might not exist, which would mean regenerated infected remain active indefinitely. This is worst-case scenario for infection timeline, because it means infected never become safe through natural degradation alone. The NYPD reported at 1:43 a.m. that infected incidents throughout New York City are overwhelming their response capacity. They're requesting citizens to shelter in place, to barricade themselves in secure locations, and to avoid all contact with anyone showing symptoms of illness or aggressive behavior. The guidance is essentially an admission that the NYPD can't protect everyone, and that individual survival is now dependent on personal action rather than institutional response. At 1:51 a.m., we received word that the White House is convening an emergency session of the National Security Council to address the crisis. The president will be briefed on the situation at JFK, on the spread to other cities, on the international dimensions of the outbreak, and on military response options. We don't know what decisions will come from that meeting, but the involvement of the president and NSC signals that this is being treated as a national security emergency rather than just a public health crisis. The Terminal 3 secure zone successfully defended against an assault by approximately 200 infected at 1:58 a.m. The defense was conducted entirely by civilian volunteers who've organized themselves into watch teams and armed themselves with improvised weapons. They killed all 200 infected without any defenders being bitten, which is an extraordinary achievement for people who had zero combat training 24 hours ago. This is what humans are capable of when survival depends on it. At 2:06 a.m., Sarah's monitoring social media and seeing that global reaction to the crisis is evolving from concern to panic. Countries are closing borders, canceling all flights to and from the United States, implementing quarantines for anyone who's been in New York recently, and preparing their own emergency response systems for potential outbreaks. The global economy is beginning to freeze as international travel stops, and trade routes are disrupted. What started as a medical emergency at one airport is becoming a civilization-level crisis that's affecting every aspect of human society. The military casualty count reached 112 at 2:14 a.m., including the 2 soldiers who were bitten and euthanized earlier. Most casualties are from infected bites during close quarters combat, but some are from friendly fire in the chaos of clearing operations, and a few are from accidents as exhausted soldiers make fatal mistakes in judgment. Colonel Martinez is rotating units to ensure no one is active for more than 4 hours straight, trying to maintain alertness and combat effectiveness through a crisis that's already lasted 15 hours with no end in sight. At 2:19 a.m., we're going to take a brief pause in our coverage to bring you an important message about our broadcast. Sarah and I have been on the air for 15 hours continuously. We have backup power, we have supplies, we have a secure position, and we're committed to continuing this broadcast for as long as necessary. If you're finding value in our coverage, if the information we're providing is helping you survive, we ask you to remember Outbreak FM when this crisis is over. Tell others about this frequency. Share information about our commitment to emergency broadcasting. And if this broadcast helps you get through the night, stay with us. We're here. We're not leaving. More updates will follow.